If your surname is on this list, you are not just Portuguese by blood. You are tied to a specific ship, a specific captain, a specific coastline, and in most cases, to a specific moment when Europe stopped believing the world ended at the horizon. 10 surnames, 10 bloodlines, 10 doors that open backwards into the age of discovery, and by the end of this video, you will know exactly where your name stood when the sails went up. But stay until number 1, because that surname carries a secret the Portuguese crown spent nearly 500 years trying to bury under royal seals, missing maps, and a policy historians today call the politics of silence. Number 10. Veloso. The name comes from the Latin villosus, hairy, shaggy, the rough-bearded one. It started as a nickname, not a noble title, and that is exactly the point. Because the Veloso line was not famous for crowns, it was famous for being on board. A Fernão Veloso sailed with Vasco da Gama on the first voyage to India in 1497. He is named in the chronicles by hand, an ordinary sailor who went ashore on the coast of southern Africa, almost got himself killed by a local tribe, and had to be rescued by Gama himself when he ran for the boats with the locals at his heels. If your surname is Veloso, your line runs through one of the men who stepped onto African soil before any European map had drawn it correctly. Most of his crewmates never came home. The next name sounds gentler, almost domestic, but trace it back 500 years, and you find a man who walked into the court of the Ming dynasty while Europe still thought the East was a rumor. Number 9. Andrade. Andrade is a toponymic surname from a parish in Galicia and northern Portugal, meaning roughly the place of Andrade, the lands of a man named Andrade, an old Germanic root brought by the Suebi 1,000 years before. Quiet origins. But the Andrade line gave Portugal Fernão Pires de Andrade, the captain who in 1517 sailed up the Pearl River and became the first official Portuguese envoy to the Chinese Empire. He brought trade. He brought letters from King Manuel. His brother Simão came later, and behaved so badly that the Ming court banned the Portuguese from Canton for decades. If your surname is Andrade, your blood is tied to the first European hand that knocked on China's door, and to the brother whose arrogance slammed it shut again. One family, 2 empires. A door that opened and closed in the same generation. The next surname most people assume is Spanish. It is not. Number 8. Sequeira. Sequeira comes from sequeiro, dry land, unirrigated ground, the kind of stony field where only the stubborn could farm. A peasant root for what became a captain's name, because in 1509, Diogo Lopes de Sequeira sailed an expedition into the Strait of Malacca, the trading throat of all Asia, and became the first European to set eyes on that city. He was nearly killed in the attempt. Malay nobles plotted to massacre his crew. Several of his men were taken. Sequeira barely escaped back to sea. 2 years later, Afonso de Albuquerque came back for revenge, and Malacca fell. If your surname is Sequeira, your ancestor opened the gate the empire then kicked down. He saw the spice routes before any other European, and he paid for it in blood and abandoned shipmates. The next name looks like a religious title. It is not. It is a coastline. Number 7. Calm. Calm means, literally, dog. And no, that is not the most flattering origin in a list of noble navigators. But the Calm line was not known for the meaning of its name. It was known for the man it produced. Diogo Calm was the navigator chosen by King João II in 1482 to push past the equator down the western coast of Africa, territory no European ship had ever charted. He found the mouth of the Congo River. He planted stone pillars, the padrões, carved with the royal arms of Portugal, the first European monuments on sub-Saharan African soil. 2 of those pillars still exist today. If your surname is Calm, your ancestor was the man who stretched the known world by thousands of kilometers in a single decade, and whose stone markers are still readable 5 centuries later. He vanished on his last voyage. The sea kept him. The stones remained. The next surname carries the name of an entire island chain that did not exist on any European map before a Portuguese ship found it. Number 6. Mascarenhas. Mascarenhas comes from mascara, mask, and by tradition refers to an ancestor with a marked face, or a man who fought in a tournament wearing one. From a name that means the masked came a navigator, whose family name was put onto the map of the world. Pedro Mascarenhas, sailing for the Portuguese crown in the early 1500s, sighted the islands east of Madagascar, what we now call the Mascarene Islands, Mauritius, Réunion, Rodrigues, an entire archipelago carrying his family name to this day. He went on to become Viceroy of Portuguese India. If your surname is Mascarenhas, an entire chain of islands in the Indian Ocean still bears your blood signature. Few families in history can say that. Yours can. Before we continue, if any of this is hitting close, subscribe to this channel. Every week we open another door into the secrets buried inside surnames and bloodlines. Hit subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Now back to the list. Because we are leaving the captains who came home and entering the line of men who paid for the discoveries. Number 5. Zarco. Zarco comes from the old Iberian word for someone with light blue or unusually pale eyes. A striking, almost unsettling color in a Mediterranean face. It was a nickname before it was a noble name. But the Zarco line gave Portugal one of the men who began the entire age of discovery. João Gonçalves Zarco, sailing under Prince Henry the Navigator, reached Porto Santo in 1418, and the year after that, Madeira itself, an island so densely forested at the time that the early settlers set it on fire to clear the land, and by some chronicles, the fire burned for 7 years. Zarco became the first Captain Donatary of Madeira, founded its first noble line, and his descendants ruled the island for generations. If your surname is Zarco, or Gonçalves Zarco, your blood is rooted in the very first chapter of the discoveries. Before India, before Brazil, before the Cape was rounded, there was Madeira, and there was a man with pale eyes who claimed it for the crown. The next surname most people assume is Italian. By origin, it is, but it became the secret backbone of the Portuguese navy. Number 4. Peçanha. Peçanha is the Portuguese form of Peçanho, a Genoese family. In 1317, King Dinis of Portugal signed a contract with the Genoese admiral Manuel Peçanho, hiring him and his line to serve, by hereditary right, as admirals of the Portuguese fleet. That single contract laid the foundation for what, a century later, would become the Age of Discovery. Without Genoese naval knowledge stitched into the Portuguese court, there is no Henry the Navigator. There is no Sagres School of Pilots. There is no Cabral, no Gama, no Cão. If your surname is Peçanha, your ancestors did not just sail, they built the institution that made the sailing possible. Later chroniclers preferred to tell the story as a purely Portuguese triumph, but the Peçanha contract is still in the archives. It is dated, it is signed, and it is the seed from which the empire grew. The next surname belongs to the man who turned Portuguese exploration into a sword. Number 3. Albuquerque. Albuquerque is a toponym from the town of Albuquerque on the Iberian frontier, by one reading the white oak, by another the land of cork oaks. Quiet land, hard land, the kind of place that produces hard men, and the Albuquerque line produced one of the hardest. Afonso de Albuquerque, second governor of Portuguese India, took Goa in 1510, took Malacca in 1511, took Hormuz in 1515. In a single decade he locked down the choke points of the Indian Ocean for the Portuguese crown, and made Portugal, briefly, the most powerful maritime empire on earth. He died in December of 1515, on board his ship as it sailed back toward Goa, broken by his enemies at court, even as the conquered cities still bore his banners. If your surname is Albuquerque, your blood is tied to the man who turned exploration into empire, and who was then quietly destroyed by the very king he had served. The next surname is the one the crown almost succeeded in erasing. Number 2. Corte Real. Corte Real translates literally as royal court, a name granted in proximity to the king. The line was Azorian nobility, raised in the islands the Portuguese had just claimed from the open Atlantic. 3 figures carried the name into history. João Vaz Corte Real, by one tradition that is debated among historians, sailed into the western Atlantic in the 1470s, possibly reaching the coast that later maps would call Newfoundland. His sons Gaspar and Miguel sailed in 1501 and 1502, charted what is almost certainly the coast of Labrador and Newfoundland, and brought back captured indigenous people whom the chronicles describe in detail. Both brothers were lost at sea on those voyages, one after the other, vanishing into the cold Western Ocean. The family name survived. The full record of where they went did not. If your surname is Corte Real, your ancestors were among the first documented Europeans to touch North American soil after the Norse, and the documentation of those voyages has been missing, incomplete, or contested ever since. Which brings us to number 1. And now, number 1. This surname was not simply silenced. The voyages tied to it were systematically wrapped in royal secrecy, as official policy of the Portuguese crown, a policy historians today call the Política do Sigilo, the politics of silence, the deliberate suppression of charts, logbooks, and route maps to prevent rival kingdoms from claiming what Portugal had already found. What survives only because individual families and individual scribes risked everything to keep their papers, their stories, their family memory alive against that silence. This is what they protected. Number 1. Cabral. Cabral comes from cabra, goat, and originally referred to a herder, a man of the rough mountain pastures. From that humble root rose Pedro Álvares Cabral, who in the year 1500, leading a fleet of 13 ships meant for India, swung wide into the Atlantic and made landfall on the coast of what is today Brazil. He claimed it for the Portuguese crown. He sent one ship home with the news. He continued to India, lost more than half his fleet on the way, and returned with a cargo of spices that paid for the voyage many times over. But here is what the chronicles do not always tell you. The Portuguese crown, under the Treaty of Tordesillas, had every reason to keep the exact details of that landfall quiet, the true dimensions of Brazil, the wind systems that carried Cabral so far west, the route home. Maps were classified. Pilots were sworn to secrecy under threat of death. Knowledge that should have been celebrated was sealed inside royal archives, some of it lost forever in the Lisbon earthquake of 1755. If your surname is Cabral, your bloodline is tied to the man whose landfall opened an entire continent of Portuguese-speaking nations. And the full truth of how that happened, how accidental the accident really was, how much the crown already suspected before the fleet ever left port, is a question historians are still arguing about today. 500 years later, the silence around Cabral has never been fully broken. 10 surnames, 10 captains, 10 doors leading back through caravels, monsoons, padrões of stone, banned charts, and oceans that swallowed entire crews. Veloso on the African shore, Andrade at the gates of China, Sequeira at Malacca, Calm at the Congo, Mascarenhas in the Indian Ocean, Zarco in the fire of Madeira, Pisagna laying the foundation of the navy, Albuquerque carving the empire, Corte Real lost in the cold western sea, and Cabral, whose name the silence still surrounds. Your surname is not just a name, it is a ship, it is a coastline. It is a set of loyalties men died to defend, and a set of secrets the crown spent centuries trying to control. To carry one of these names is to carry the wake of a vessel that left Lisbon 500 years ago and never fully came home. Write your surname in the comments and tell us which clan your blood runs through. And if you know a specific story your family carried out of Portugal, out of the Azores, out of Madeira, out of Brazil, tell it, because these stories deserve to be heard, and most of them only survive because someone, somewhere, refused to let the silence win. If this video opened a door for you, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. The next video is already waiting.